Hey, Soul Stories fam. We've got a sweet and totally swoon-worthy love story for you today. Let's jump in. On a late weekend afternoon, the parking lot of a high-end shopping center in Manhattan, New York, buzzed with sleek luxury cars glistening under the sunlight, reflecting the wealth and power of the elite class. The soft purr of engines blended with the carefree laughter of shoppers and the faint scent of expensive perfume drifting in the air. Standing out among it all was a striking red Ferrari SF90 Stradale, parked like a precious gem, drawing every gaze. Sophie Langdon, 29, stepped out of the shopping mall with an iced coffee in hand. A mechanical engineer with a passion for supercars, she couldn't resist the magnetic pull of the Ferrari. Her blonde hair was tied up high, and her casual outfit jeans, a white shirt, and sneakers made her look nothing like the typical clientele of this place. But her eyes lit up the moment she saw the car, like a child in front of a favorite toy. She walked closer, crouched down to admire the aerodynamic curves of the body, her fingers unconsciously gliding over the glossy paint, appreciating the perfection of its design. "Don't touch what doesn't belong to you." A deep, sharp voice rang out from behind, slicing through Sophie's train of thought. She turned around to find herself face to face with Damian Cross, 37, CEO of Cross Capital, a billion-dollar investment firm. He stood tall in a flawlessly tailored black suit, his ice blue eyes as cold as steel. With chiseled features and not a hint of a smile, he radiated authority and a hint of arrogance. People nearby turned to look, curious about the confrontation. Sophie straightened up, crossed her arms, and offered a defiant smirk. "Oh, my bad. I thought this was a car show, not a museum. I didn't see a do not touch sign." Her voice was calm but laced with sarcasm, enough to make a few onlookers chuckle. Damian clenched his fist, clearly not used to being talked back to. "Who do you think you are touching my car? Do you have any idea how much this vehicle costs?" he said, stepping forward, his voice dropping to a low, threatening tone. Sophie didn't flinch. Instead, she raised an eyebrow and casually set her coffee cup on the car's hood, a move that nearly sent Damian into a frenzy. "I'm someone who knows exactly how that engine works. And you? Besides yelling, what do you know about it?" She tilted her head, her smile growing more provocative. "I don't care how much it costs, pal. I care about how it's built. Twin-turbo V8 engine, 986 horsepower, cutting-edge hybrid system. It's a shame when the owner only knows how to show it off without understanding its true value." The crowd now openly laughed. Someone was filming the exchange on their phone, while a few girls whispered excitedly about the woman bold enough to challenge Damian Cross. Damian could feel the blood rushing to his face, not from embarrassment, but from the loss of control. "You don't get to speak to me like that," he growled, trying to reassert dominance. Sophie shrugged. "And you don't get to turn a parking lot into your personal theater? Chill out, man. It's a car, not a crown." Without waiting for a response, she turned her back and walked away, leaving her coffee cup on the hood like a declaration of war. "Stop right there," Damian called out, his voice echoing through the lot. Sophie paused, turned around with a mockingly patient expression. "What's your name?" he asked, not even sure why he needed to know. "Sophie Langdon," she said coolly. "And you? Besides yelling at strangers, what do you do for a living?" She winked and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Damian standing there both angry and confused. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't in control. He stood alone beside his Ferrari, staring in the direction she had vanished. Picking up her coffee cup, he shook his head and muttered, "Sophie Langdon, who are you?" Meanwhile, Sophie, on her way back to the auto repair shop, smiled to herself, feeling as if she had just won a chess game she didn't even know she was playing. Neither of them realized that this encounter was about to change their lives forever. Just hours after the tense standoff in the parking lot, Damian Cross was behind the wheel of his Ferrari SF90 Stradale, cruising through the heart of Manhattan. Neon lights glimmered off the red paint, but the cool evening air did nothing to soothe his mood. Sophie Langdon's sarcastic remarks echoed in his head, making his jaw clench. "Sophie Langdon, who does she think she is?" he muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. But just as he hit the gas, the car suddenly trembled. The engine let out a high-pitched whine, and warning lights flashed across the dashboard. Damien slammed the brakes and pulled over, fury flaring as he realized he was now stuck on a crowded city street. He immediately called his premium maintenance service, the kind only the ultra-wealthy used, with expertly trained technicians on standby. "I need someone here immediately," Damien barked into the phone, his voice cold but barely masking his irritation. "My Ferrari's malfunctioning, and I won't tolerate delays." The representative assured him their best technician would be there within 20 minutes. Sitting in the car, Damien drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, scanning the flow of pedestrians with a scowl. The image of that blonde girl coolly setting her iced coffee on his car was still irritating him. Meanwhile, at Sophie's auto shop, tucked in a bustling corner of Brooklyn, the air buzzed with the sounds of clanking metal and the scent of motor oil. Her shop was a modern, well-equipped space with state-of-the-art tools and a row of pristine supercars, each one a mechanical masterpiece. Still in her jeans and white button-up shirt, Sophie was crouched over a Lamborghini, humming along to jazz music playing through a speaker. Her phone rang. When she answered, the familiar voice of the service dispatcher came through. "Sophie, we've got an urgent case. Ferrari SF90, electrical system failure. VIP client, so please no mistakes." Sophie raised an eyebrow and smirked. "VIP or not, I only care about engines. Send me the address." She wiped her hands, grabbed her toolbox, and hopped into the shop's silver work van. By the time she arrived, Damien was standing beside his Ferrari, arms crossed, his expression thunderous. His eyes narrowed when he saw the silver van stop, and then narrowed even more as Sophie stepped out. "You," he said, half stunned, half annoyed. Sophie recognized him immediately and gave a half smile. Well, well, small world. What's wrong with your precious car that needed me to come save the day, Mr. Moneybags?" Damien scoffed, struggling to maintain his composure. "I didn't call you. I called the service, and clearly they made a mistake sending someone like you." Sophie didn't flinch. Unbothered by the insult, she set down her toolbox, popped the hood, and got to work. "Why don't you keep standing there sulking? I'll figure it out faster if you don't get in the way." Damien opened his mouth to retort, but the confidence in her movements silenced him. She plugged a diagnostic device into the car, eyes scanning the data while her hands deftly checked the cables and sensors. A small crowd started to gather, curious to see a young woman handling a supercar with such skill and ease. A few minutes later, Sophie straightened up, nodding as if she'd just solved a puzzle. The problem's in the hybrid system's electronic control unit. One of the sensors shorted out, which caused the engine instability. But that's just surface level. The system shows signs of long-term overload, probably from improper use. "I can patch it for now, get you running for another 30 minutes or so. Just enough to get home. But to properly fix it, I'll need to take it back to my shop and work on it for at least 2 or 3 days." She turned to Damien with a smirk. "This car has more issues than your attitude. You know that?" Caught off guard, Damien let out the faintest hint of a smile, rare and fleeting, before quickly masking it with his usual cold expression. "You sure you can fix it?" "I don't want to waste more time," he said, voice tinged with doubt. Sophie shrugged. "I'm the one who understands how this engine works. You, besides yelling, what do you know about it? Either let me work or figure out how to tow it yourself." Damien folded his arms, watching her closely. He didn't want to admit it, but the way she handled her tools, the complex diagnostics, her muttering of technical terms was impressive. Sophie bent down, removed a small circuit board, and examined each part with the precision of an artist. She replaced the faulty sensor with a temporary part from her kit, carefully reconnecting the system. "This is a temporary fix," she explained, not looking up. "This sensor will keep the hybrid system stable for about 30 minutes. If you don't bring it to my shop, it'll break down again, probably in the middle of traffic. And next time, I won't come save you." She stood up, started the engine, and it purred to life, smooth but clearly patched. Damien looked at her, a mix of irritation and reluctant admiration in his eyes. "You're good," he said, almost grudgingly. Sophie wiped her hands on a rag and gave a crooked grin. "Good? I'm the best in the business, buddy. But hey, keep that attitude. It really matches your tailored suit." She closed the hood, packed up her tools, and handed him a business card. Bring the car to my shop within 24 hours if you don't want it turning into a very expensive paperweight. Address is on there. The invoice will go through the service. Without waiting for a reply, she climbed back into her van, but not before glancing back and adding, "Try not to break it again, Mr. Moneybags." Damien watched her drive off, her business card in hand, feeling an odd mix of annoyance and curiosity. "Sophie Langdon," he muttered again for the second time that day. He climbed back into his Ferrari, started the engine, and noted that it ran at least for now. Meanwhile, Sophie drove back to her shop, smiling to herself. She wasn't sure why, but something about that arrogant CEO got under her skin in a way that was both irritating and oddly entertaining. Just another difficult client, she told herself, shaking her head. But deep down, both of them felt a spark. Neither of them would admit it, not yet. Back on the neon-lit Manhattan streets, the Ferrari glided smoothly through traffic. But Damien already knew he'd be taking it to Sophie's shop, not just for the car, but for a reason he couldn't quite name. That unexpected encounter had planted the seed for something much bigger, pulling them both into a journey full of friction and discovery. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the large glass windows of Damien Cross's private garage, located in his estate on the outskirts of Manhattan, about an hour's drive from the city center. The garage was his personal sanctuary, spacious, spotless to the point of sterility, with gleaming floors and 3 other luxury supercars arranged like pieces of art. The Ferrari SF90 Stradale, still running on Sophie Langdon's temporary fix from the night before, sat in the center, silently threatening to break down if not properly repaired. Damien, dressed in rare casual sportswear instead of his usual tailored suit, stood with arms crossed, glaring at the Ferrari like it had betrayed him. After considering Sophie's warning, Damien had called the premium service line and demanded she come to his garage instead of him driving to Brooklyn. "I don't have time to run across town," he said sharply over the phone. "If she wants to fix it, she'll come here." The service agreed, and now Sophie stood at the estate's gate, toolbox slung over her shoulder, eyes sweeping over the luxurious surroundings with thinly veiled amusement. "Not bad for a guy who yells at strangers," she muttered as the butler led her into the garage. Damien saw her walk in, still in jeans, white button-up shirt, and sneakers, her blonde hair tied neatly on top of her head. He frowned. "You're 5 minutes late." Sophie smirked, setting her toolbox down beside the Ferrari. "And you broke a masterpiece. Who's the bigger offense here, Mr. Arrogant?" Without waiting for a reply, she popped the hood and dove into her work, laser-focused as if the rest of the world didn't exist. Damien stood a few steps away, watching her. He wasn't used to having people, especially people who challenged him working in his personal space. But the way she handled her tools, the way she read the diagnostic data, even the grip of her wrench, it was almost hypnotic. Sophie murmured to the engine, not to him, "You're a moody little thing, but I'll make you sing again. Don't worry." Damien let out a short, surprised chuckle, a sound even he barely recognized. Sophie looked up, raising an eyebrow. "What's so funny? Don't tell me you think engines don't have personality." He crossed his arms again, trying to recompose himself. "I don't think a pile of metal has a soul, and I also don't think you'll do more than another temporary patch job like last night." Sophie laughed, loud and unbothered, her voice echoing off the pristine garage walls. "Oh, honey, this car has more soul than you. But go ahead, keep doubting me. I love proving people wrong." She bent over again, pulling out a series of cables and inspecting each part with the meticulousness of an artist. "This hybrid system is overloaded. Someone guessing you likes flooring it like you're on an F1 track, but doesn't bother with proper maintenance. The sensor I replaced last night was just a Band-Aid. If you want it stable, I need to replace the entire control module and recalibrate the software." Damien frowned, unsure whether he should be irritated or impressed. "You say that like I don't know how to drive my own car." Sophie looked up, a playful glint in her eye. "I didn't say you don't know how to drive. I said you don't know how to take care of it. Big difference, champ." She turned back to the engine, but the tension between them had softened. Her teasing jab seemed to melt some of the frost in the room. Damien, not knowing what else to do, stepped a little closer, pretending to inspect the car, but really watching her. As Sophie worked, a drop of oil splattered onto her cheek, leaving a small black streak. Without thinking, Damien reached out to wipe it off but stopped himself halfway, realizing what he was doing. Sophie caught the movement and raised an eyebrow. "What's that? You thinking of becoming a mechanic now?" Damien quickly pulled his hand back, awkward in a way he rarely was. "I was going to say you got something on your face." Sophie laughed, wiping the smudge with a rag, her eyes twinkling. "Worry about your car, Mr. Moneybags. I'll handle my own face." She returned to the engine, removing an electronic module as she explained. "This right here is the heart of the hybrid system. It's fried from the overload, and the software is outdated. I'll replace it today, but recalibrating it will take 2 more days back at my shop. You don't have the specialized equipment here." Damien nodded, for once offering no argument. He found himself drawn in by how she spoke about the car, like it was a living thing, not just a status symbol. "You talk about it like it has feelings," he said before he could stop himself, his tone noticeably less cold. Sophie paused and looked at him, genuinely surprised. "Engines have stories, you know. How they're built, how they're treated. This one tells me you're a control freak with no patience to understand it." Damien fell silent. Her words hit something deeper. He'd always seen the Ferrari as a symbol of success, but Sophie saw it as a work of art, something alive. That made him feel like he'd missed something. By the time Sophie finished replacing the module, the afternoon sunlight was turning golden through the garage windows. She closed the hood, wiped her hands, and turned to Damien. "That's it for today. The car will run fine for a few days, but you have to bring it to my shop for me to finish the job unless you want it breaking down in the middle of Manhattan again." She winked and handed him a slip of paper with an appointment time. "Don't keep me waiting." Damien took the paper, eyes fixed on her as she walked out of the garage, confident and relaxed. He muttered under his breath, "Sophie Langdon, you're trouble." But this time, there was no anger in his voice, only curiosity. On the way back to Brooklyn, Sophie smiled to herself, thinking of the infuriating CEO. She didn't quite know why she enjoyed provoking him so much, but there was something about Damien that made her want to dig deeper. Back in the garage, Damien stood next to the Ferrari, looking at the appointment slip in his hand, feeling like he'd just been pulled into a game whose rules he didn't yet understand. Both of them felt it, that tiny spark, that invisible thread beginning to form, quietly preparing them for the collisions yet to come. The afternoon air in Damien Cross's private garage still carried the faint scent of oil and the soft clinking of tools as Sophie Langdon worked. Golden sunlight poured through the large glass windows, casting a warm glow over the Ferrari SF90 Stradale. Sophie had just finished replacing the hybrid systems control module, reminding Damien that the car would need to be brought to her Brooklyn shop for a full recalibration, 2 to 3 days of work. Damien, dressed in sportswear instead of his usual suit, stood nearby with arms folded. His icy expression had softened into something more curious, almost reflective. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke, his voice lighter than usual. "You've been working all day. Want a coffee? There's a decent cafe nearby." Sophie looked up, raising a skeptical brow, half amused, half surprised. "Mr. Moneybags inviting me for coffee? Careful, I might start thinking you're trying to be decent." Damien gave a faint smirk, not replying, but the look in his eyes was a challenge. "Go ahead, turn me down." They left the garage and drove to a small cafe tucked into a quiet Manhattan side street. The warm yellow light spilled from its windows, blending with the gentle hum of jazz music. It was nearly empty at this late hour, just a few patrons sipping quietly, giving the place a calm, intimate feel. In a dim corner booth, Sophie sat across from Damien, slowly turning her cup of black coffee, her eyes studying him as if trying to read between the lines. "So," she said, her voice laced with her usual sarcasm, "what's this really about? You don't seem like the type to offer coffee out of pure gratitude." Damien looked out the window, tapping his finger lightly on the table, as if weighing the risk of opening up. "That Ferrari, it's not just a car," he began slowly, his voice low. "My father gave it to me in 2020, just after it launched. He was a car enthusiast, always said a great car wasn't just a machine, but a symbol of passion and freedom. He ordered that Sorcy F90 for me as a gift, his last one, before he died of a terminal illness. I've kept it ever since, as a way to remember him, to keep my promise, to make him proud. He paused, eyes distant, as though he could still see his father standing beside him. After he passed, I buried myself in work. I needed to control everything: money, the company, my life. Because if I didn't, I was afraid I'd lose it all, like I lost him. He turned towards Sophie, maybe expecting another witty remark, but she simply listened, her coffee cup suspended midair. Sophie took a sip, her gaze softening. I get that, she said quietly. My dad loved cars too, not supercars like yours though. He was into classics, Mustangs, old Chevys. He called them cars with soul. He taught me everything: how to rebuild a carburetor, how to tell what a car's saying by the sound of its engine. He passed away when I started college, but his passion was why I went into engineering. I wanted to prove that a girl could do it, even when everyone said I didn't belong. She smiled faintly, though sadness flickered behind her eyes. This field isn't easy for women. I had to work twice as hard, prove myself 3 times over, just to get a foot in the door. But every time I fix a car, I feel like he's still there, watching. Damien listened quietly. For the first time in a long while, he felt a connection without needing to say much. He wasn't used to sharing, especially not with someone as direct and unfiltered as Sophie. I don't trust people easily, he admitted, voice low, almost reluctant. Sophie looked straight at him, her lips tugging into a small smile. Good. Neither do I. Her words weren't sharp this time, but sincere, almost like a truce. It was as if they were both standing on the same thin edge between self-protection and the longing to be understood. The soft jazz filled the quiet between them, casting a gentle rhythm over the conversation. Damien talked more about his father, their shared love for car shows, the way his dad always encouraged him to dream big but stay grounded in what truly mattered. That Ferrari was the last thing he gave me. I don't keep it because of its price. I keep it because every time I see it, I remember him. Sophie nodded, her gaze warm. I feel the same. Every classic car I restore is a way to keep my dad alive. But you know, sometimes the things we hold on to the tightest are the ones that exhaust us the most. Keeping a car running is nothing compared to keeping a heart at peace. Her words landed deep. Damien went quiet, eyes drifting back to her. Blonde hair pulled high, oil smudges faint on her hands, but eyes bright with clarity and strength. She didn't belong in his world of fake smiles and high-stakes games. She was real, and that was both unsettling and magnetic. You're not afraid of being judged, are you? He asked, genuinely curious. Sophie laughed, the sound light and bold, echoing through the quiet cafe. Afraid? I've been judged my whole life, sweetheart. Now I just do what I'm good at and let the world figure itself out. They kept talking, about cars, about setbacks, about moments when everything nearly fell apart. Sophie told him about the wealthy client who refused to let her touch his car just because she was a woman, and how she turned that rejection into fuel to open her own shop. Damien, in turn, shared the pressures of running a financial empire, the sleepless nights, the constant weight of decisions that could cost millions. Different worlds, same wounds, loss, pressure, the need to prove something. When their coffee had long gone cold, Sophie checked the time and stood. It's getting late, Mr. Moneybags. I've got to prep the shop for your Ferrari. Don't forget your appointment. I hate waiting. Damien smiled, this time without hiding it. I'll bring it in, but stop calling me Mr. Moneybags. Sophie winked. Well, that depends. Gotta see if you've earned the right to be called by your name. She walked out, her steps light but steady, leaving Damien at the table, fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup, his mind spinning with images of her. On the drive back to Brooklyn, Sophie glanced out the window, lost in thought. She didn't want to admit it, but their conversation had stirred something in her. Damien wasn't just an arrogant CEO. He was complicated. Meanwhile, back in the mansion garage, Damien stood alone with his Ferrari, the last gift from his father, and muttered, Sophie Langdon, you've got me all tangled up. A fragile connection had formed between them like a small flicker of light in the shadows of their pasts, but neither of them yet knew that light was about to be tested by the demands of their very different worlds. Damian Cross's penthouse sat atop a gleaming glass tower in the heart of Manhattan, where the city lights stretched like a glittering sea of stars. The interior was a seamless blend of luxury and minimalism: polished blackwood floors, pristine white leather furniture, and abstract art lining the walls, all reflecting the cold, refined taste of its owner. Dressed in a charcoal gray tailored suit, Damien stood by the sleek marble bar, pouring 2 glasses of red wine. His expression carried a trace of tension, though the corners of his mouth lifted slightly when the doorbell rang. After their conversation at the cafe the night before, he had called Sophie unexpectedly and invited her to dinner, giving her almost no time to prepare. Sophie Langdon, the woman who had shaken his composure at every turn, was about to step into his most private space. She arrived still in her work clothes from the garage: dark jeans with traces of oil, a rolled-up white button-down, and dusty sneakers. Her blonde hair was tied high, a few loose strands falling from the day's labor. In her hand, she still held a rag that faintly smelled of grease. "Well, Damien," she said, stepping inside, her eyes scanning the lavish space with amused curiosity. "When you summoned me so suddenly, I figured you needed your pipes checked, not dinner." Damien handed her a glass of wine, lips curling into a smirk. "I do have a name, Sophie, and I thought you might prefer cod over copper fittings." Sophie took a sip, smiling slightly. "Well, that depends. How good is the cod? Slick?" Dinner was served at the long dining table, soft candlelight casting a warm glow and softening the atmosphere. They sat across from each other, and the conversation gradually drifted into deeper territory. Sophie spoke about her dream of opening a free technical training center for young girls. "I want them to know they can do anything no matter what anyone tells them," she said, eyes shining with conviction. "My dad used to say dreams didn't have to be big. They just had to mean enough to get you out of bed in the morning. I want other girls to have that chance without having to fight like I did." Damien listened, drawn in by her fire. He shared his own abandoned dream, starting a foundation for orphans. "I used to think I could change the world," he said quietly, "but then I got pulled into the need to control everything: the company, the money, my image. Somewhere along the way, I forgot why I started." The mood grew more intimate as they moved to the sofa near the window, gazing out over the sparkling city. Sophie sat close enough for Damien to catch the faint scent of oil mingled with her natural strength. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers along the back of her hand, where a smudge of grease still lingered. It was a soft, hesitant gesture, but one filled with meaning. "You remind me of the person I used to want to be," he said, his voice husky, his eyes locked on hers. Sophie didn't pull away. She tilted her head, a half smile playing on her lips. "Careful, Damien. Keep saying things like that, and I might start to think you actually have a heart." He leaned in, his warm breath grazing her cheek, close enough that a kiss seemed inevitable. Sophie's pulse quickened, but her tone remained teasing. "Don't rush it, Slick. I'm not that easily seduced by candles and wine." Just then, the doorbell rang again. Damien's butler stepped in, voice low. "Sir, Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Warner are here. They say it's urgent, something about the new deal." Damien stiffened. His hand slipped from Sophie's. A flicker of conflict crossed his face before his expression turned cold again. "Let them in," he said, rising. 2 middle-aged men in expensive suits entered, exuding the confidence of seasoned power brokers. James Hamilton, tall with silver-streaked hair, glanced at Sophie in her oil-stained jeans and work shirt and sneered. "Damien," he said, lips curling, "I didn't know you hosted dinner parties with maintenance staff." His tone was laced with contempt, as if Sophie's very presence was an insult. Damien glanced between Sophie and the investors. He knew these men, they held sway over deals worth billions. He needed to protect his image, his authority, and in a moment of weakness, he made the wrong choice. "She's just a mechanic," he said flatly. "She was helping me with something." The room turned to ice. Sophie set down her wine glass with deliberate calm. Her eyes met Damien's, not angry but cold, sharp, like a blade. "Just a mechanic?" she repeated, her voice terrifyingly steady. Hamilton laughed, clapping Damien on the shoulder. "Good. You shouldn't let people like that interfere with our world." Sophie stood, still holding the rag in her hand, now clenched tightly. She walked toward the door with her chin held high, voice cutting through the silence like steel. You're not worthy of my tools, Damian Cross, and you sure as hell aren't worthy of my time. She walked out without looking back. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. She stood in front of the elevator, still in her work clothes, dark jeans streaked with oil, rolled up white shirt, and scuffed sneakers head held high, eyes cold and sharp as blades. Damian, still in his charcoal gray suit, remained frozen in place, the sting of his own words. She's just a mechanic, echoing in the silence. The investors, James Hamilton and Warner, burst out laughing, but their laughter only deepened the cut inside Sophie. She clenched the greasy rag in her hand, her voice calm but steely. I can fix your engine, Damian Cross, but I can't fix the backbone of a weak man. Without waiting for a response, she stepped into the elevator, hit the button, and let the doors close, leaving Damian standing there, haunted by the look in her eyes. Inside the elevator, Sophie leaned back against the wall. Her breathing slowed, but her hands still gripped the rag tightly. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. All she felt was a slow-burning rage, tangled with bitter disappointment. She had thought Damian was different that the moment he held her hand, leaned in close as if to kiss her, it had meant something real. But when faced with a choice, he had picked reputation. He had chosen fake investor smiles over standing up for her. Stupid Sophie, she muttered, staring at her reflection in the metal door. He wasn't worth it. And yet deep down, the hurt wasn't just from the insult, it was from how much she had begun to believe he might understand her, that he might see her. The elevator opened. Sophie stepped out into the lobby, and the neon lights of Manhattan greeted her like a slap. She climbed into her battered shop van and drove through the buzzing streets back to Brooklyn. Jazz played softly on the radio, but she didn't turn it up, just let it fill the silence. Her mind kept looping back Damian's words, Hamilton's smug face, and the way she had walked away without looking back. You did the right thing, Sophie, she told herself, fingers tightening on the steering wheel. No one gets to make you feel small. But even as she repeated it, the ache inside remained. Back at the penthouse, Damian stood motionless in front of the elevator, staring at the place where Sophie had disappeared. Her words, I can't fix the backbone of a weak man, had hit him like a punch to the chest. Hamilton clapped a hand on his shoulder, still chuckling. You handled that well, Damian. Can't let people like her mess with our plans. Damian didn't respond. Instead, he turned sharply. His voice was ice. Are you done? Get out. The two investors exchanged surprised looks but didn't argue. They left without another word. Damian moved to the window, staring down at the city. The glittering lights used to make him feel powerful. Now they just made him feel empty. He'd spent his life controlling everything, his company, his image, his emotions. But in trying to protect it all, he realized he'd just lost something far more valuable. At the garage in Brooklyn, Sophie walked into the fluorescent-lit shop, the familiar scent of oil and grease wrapping around her like an old friend. She tossed her keys onto the workbench and sat beside a half-repaired vintage Mustang. She picked up a wrench not because she needed to, but because she needed something to hold on to. Work was her safe space, a world she could control, a place where no one could belittle her. Focus, Sophie, she whispered. Men like him don't define you. But every time she twisted a bolt, she saw Damian his eyes when he'd held her hand, his voice when he shared his forgotten dream. She shook her head, trying to clear the memories. He made his choice, she said aloud, and it wasn't you. Back at the penthouse, Damian sat on the sofa, staring at the glass of wine Sophie had left behind. His fingers traced the rim slowly, as if trying to hold on to a piece of her. He thought of their conversation the night before her dream of opening a technical training center for girls, how she reminded him of the kind of man he used to want to be. He had opened up to her, trusted her, and she had been different. She was nothing like the plastic world he lived in, but when the moment came to prove it, he had failed her. And now the only thing left was the memory of her walking into that elevator, proud and defiant. Sophie Langdon, he whispered, voice gravelly. I screwed up. He stood, walked to his desk, opened his laptop, but couldn't bring himself to do anything. All he could see was the elevator door closing on something that might have been real. In Brooklyn, Sophie blasted rock music through the garage, letting the crashing guitars drown out the chaos in her mind. She began tearing down an engine block fast, precise, aggressive, like the work could somehow cleanse the sting of betrayal. Her co-worker, Jake, stepped in and noticed her unusually tense expression. "You okay, Soph?" he asked gently. She didn't look up, just shrugged. "I'm fine, just a long day." Jake didn't push, but he knew something was off. Sophie kept her focus on the engine, her gaze steady, but no amount of mechanical precision could dull the quiet pain. She had let her guard down with Damien, just a little, and he had let her fall. In his penthouse, Damien stood before the window, Manhattan stretching endlessly below. He thought of Sophie, her fire, her pride, the way she challenged him to be better. He had let fear of losing control dictate his choice, and now he was the one who had lost. He picked up his phone, tempted to call, but realized he didn't even have her number. "She's not the type to forgive easily," he muttered. Still, the spark of determination flared in his chest. He had to fix this. He wanted to fix this. Across the city, Sophie wiped sweat from her brow, tossed her rag aside, and whispered to herself, "You're stronger than this, Sophie. He doesn't define you." She stood up, stepped back into the noise and smell of the garage, her posture tall and unyielding. But in both their hearts, across opposite ends of the city, they each felt an emptiness neither wanted to admit. The distance between them had widened, but in that space was the beginning of something more. A path not yet walked, a question not yet answered. Damien would have to learn how to earn forgiveness, and Sophie would have to decide if he was worth a second chance. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Damien Cross's office at Cross Capital, a gleaming tower of steel and glass in the heart of Manhattan. The expansive space, with its glossy ebony desk and panoramic view of the skyline, was usually where Damien felt most in control. But today he sat motionless, his gaze blank, idly spinning an expensive fountain pen between his fingers. He hadn't written a single word. Sophie Langdon's words still echoed in his head, sharp and unrelenting. "I can fix your engine, Damien Cross, but I can't fix the backbone of a weak man." The memory sliced at his pride like a blade. He didn't blame her. He knew he deserved it. He had denied her in front of investors, called her just a mechanic, choosing his image over her dignity. And the image that haunted him now wasn't the disappointed faces of Hamilton or Warner. It was Sophie, in her oil-stained work clothes, walking proudly into that elevator with her head held high. And he had let her go. The phone rang, breaking through the fog of his thoughts. It was James Hamilton, one of the two investors from the night before. "Damien," Hamilton said briskly, "we need to meet today. This deal could bring in hundreds of millions. Don't let small distractions cloud your focus." Damien's jaw tightened. "Small?" he said coldly. "You mean letting someone get humiliated because I was too proud to defend her?" There was silence on the line. "Cross Capital doesn't need men like you," Damien said. Then he hung up. The decision wasn't just about Sophie. It was about himself, about waking up to the truth that he had spent too long in a world where reputation and power were valued more than decency. But even cutting ties with Hamilton and Warner didn't ease the weight in Damien's chest. He needed to find Sophie, needed to apologize not just for what he said, but for not standing beside her when she deserved it. He searched for the business card she'd once handed him after repairing the Ferrari. All it had was the Brooklyn shop's address and the maintenance company's logo, no phone number, no email. He called the service line, urgency in his voice. "I need to get in touch with Sophie Langdon. She worked on my Ferrari earlier this week." The receptionist hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir. We don't give out personal information, but she does work out of the Brooklyn shop. I can leave a message for her." Damien shook his head. "Number, I'll go there myself." He grabbed his coat and left the office, determined to see her face to face. Driving through the Manhattan traffic in his Ferrari, the same car that had once made him feel powerful only reminded him of his failure. He thought about Sophie's passion, her dream of opening a training center for young girls, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about her father. Her honesty had stripped away the falsehoods of his world-phony meetings, forced smiles, the constant need to maintain a polished image. "I got taken down by a wrench," he muttered to himself, a crooked smile tugging at his lips. But it wasn't defeat, it was clarity. Sophie had made him see himself for who he really was. When he arrived in Brooklyn, Damien pulled up in front of Langdon Auto, a modern industrial building with a clean, unpretentious exterior. The air was thick with the smell of oil and the clang of tools. Inside, neatly arranged vehicles and state-of-the-art equipment lined the space. But Sophie wasn't there. Jake, one of her co-workers, was under a vintage Mustang when Damien stepped in. "Where's Miss Langdon?" Damien asked, voice polite but urgent. Jake wiped his hands on a rag and looked up, brow raised. "She's out picking up parts." "Why? What's going on?" Damien shook his head. "I'll wait." He took a seat in the corner, his eyes scanning the space Sophie had built out of nothing but determination and grit. On the wall hung a sign that read, "Langdon Auto, where dreams get rebuilt." He stared at it, thinking of everything Sophie had told him. Her fight to earn her place in a male-dominated world. Her relentless drive to help others follow her path. This shop wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of her resilience. He compared it to his own office, polished, perfect, but lifeless. Sophie lived with heart, and he, for far too long, had lived with fear of failure, of imperfection, of being seen as anything less than flawless. An hour later, Sophie returned carrying a box of parts, her blonde ponytail tousled by the wind. She stopped when she saw Damien, surprise flashing in her eyes before they turned cold. "What are you doing here?" she asked, setting the box down with a thud. Her voice was calm but distant. Damien stood. He drew in a breath. "I came to apologize, Sophie. What I said the other night. I was wrong. I never should have called you just a mechanic. I never should have denied you like that. I let fear of losing face get the best of me." Sophie crossed her arms, her gaze sharp. "You think I'm mad at Hamilton and Warner?" "No, Damien. I'm mad at you. Mad that you stood there and acted like I didn't matter. I don't want empty apologies." Damien shook his head, voice low and sincere. "This isn't empty. I cut ties with them, Hamilton and Warner. I told them they're not the kind of people I want near my company. You made me see that. You made me want to be better." Sophie raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Better? You think dropping a deal makes up for what you said? I'm not here for your redemption arc, Damien. I'm not someone you use to fix your image." She turned away and began organizing the parts. But Damien stepped closer, voice earnest. "I don't care about my image. I care about fixing what I broke with you. Give me the chance to prove it, not with words, but with actions." Sophie paused, then turned to look at him. She saw something different in his eyes, something real. But she didn't let her guard down. "I don't trust easy promises, Damien. If you want to prove yourself, do it. But don't expect me to stand around and wait." She turned back to her work. Damien stood there a moment longer, his heart heavier but more resolute than ever. He left the shop, casting one last glance at the Langdon Auto sign. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but now for the first time, he was ready to fight for something real. In his car, driving back to Manhattan, Damien couldn't get Sophie out of his mind, her strength, her pride, her honesty. He knew he couldn't earn her trust back in a day, but he'd taken the first step. Back in Brooklyn, Sophie tightened a bolt under the fluorescent lights, her jaw set. "He thinks an apology is enough," she muttered. But somewhere deep inside, a faint flicker of hope stirred one she wasn't ready to acknowledge. The distance between them remained, but Damien had begun to bridge it, and Sophie, though guarded, hadn't shut the door completely. Sophie Langdon's auto shop in Brooklyn buzzed with the familiar sounds of clanking metal, low engine hums, and the sharp scent of motor oil. Fluorescent lights bathed the modern space, where sleek vehicles were lined up like mechanical works of art. Dressed in oil-streaked jeans and a rolled-up white shirt, Sophie crouched over a vintage car, her eyes focused, but her mind drifting back to the image of Damien Cross from the day before. His apology, genuine though it seemed, still wasn't enough to erase the sting of being dismissed in front of wealthy investors. She shook her head and muttered to herself, "Focus, Sophie. He's not worth the energy." But deep down, she couldn't deny the faint flicker of hope she was trying so hard to suppress. Footsteps echoed from the entrance, pulling her back to the present. She looked up to see Damien standing there, not in his usual designer suit, but in a dark blue button-up and tailored slacks. Still polished, but noticeably more grounded. He held a folder in one hand, eyes steady but tinged with apprehension. "Sophie," he called, his voice low but clear. She wiped her hands on a rag, folded her arms, and eyed him warily. "You again?" "I already told you, Damien. I don't believe in empty promises." "What are you doing here?" Damien took a deep breath and stepped closer. "I didn't come to talk. I came to show you." He handed her a document, an official proposal for the newly founded Sophie Langdon Technical Scholarship, a program for young women pursuing mechanical engineering. "I established this morning," he said sincerely. "It'll fund tuition, internships, and job placements for girls chasing dreams like yours. I want them to see that it's possible because you've already proven it is." Sophie skimmed the document, her heart flickering despite herself, but her face stayed guarded. "Very generous, Damien, but that doesn't erase what you said that night." Damien nodded, clearly expecting that response. "I know, that's why I did something else too." He pulled out his phone and showed her a just-published article from a major business news outlet. The headline read, "Cross Capital CEO issues public apology for disrespectful behavior." The article quoted him directly, "I was wrong not to stand up for a woman of integrity simply to protect my image. Integrity matters more than reputation, and I'm committed to making things right." Sophie scanned the piece, a flash of surprise in her eyes. She set the phone down and looked at him. "So what is this? A PR move or something real?" Damien shook his head, locking eyes with her. "It's real. You made me realize how fake I've been living. I don't want to be the man who stood by while you were insulted. I want to be the man who's worthy of your time." Sophie raised a brow, still laced with her signature sarcasm. "Worthy? Then prove it, slick. Change the tire on that car over there, and then we'll talk." She nodded toward a nearby vehicle, a challenge, clear and deliberate. Damien glanced at the car, then back at her, and for the first time smiled. "You don't make things easy, do you?" Sophie shrugged. "Easy was never my style." Without hesitation, Damien took off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. He grabbed a wrench from her toolbox, but it was obvious he'd never changed a tire in his life. He fumbled with the bolts, dropped the wrench twice, and nearly had the tire roll over his foot. Jake, Sophie's co-worker, chuckled loudly from across the shop. Sophie tried to hold it in, but ended up covering her mouth to muffle her laughter. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "Well, Mr. Moneybags," she teased, stepping in to pick up the tire and replace it in under 2 minutes with sharp, practiced precision. "I think you're better suited to spreadsheets than sockets." Damien, breathless and sheepish, chuckled. "Fair, but I'll learn if you let me." For the first time, Sophie's smile wasn't tinged with sarcasm. "You tried, I'll give you that. But don't think a scholarship and a headline make everything okay." She paused, then continued, her voice softer. "Still, the scholarship idea? Not bad. I've been working on a community project, free car repair for low-income families in Brooklyn. If you're serious about redemption, get involved. But fair warning, I don't go easy on newbies." Damien nodded, his eyes lighting up. "I'll do it, even if you throw a wrench at my head." She laughed, a bright, genuine sound that echoed through the shop. "Careful what you wish for, Damien. I'm really good at throwing wrenches." They stood there, surrounded by noise, grease, and the scent of fuel, but something had shifted. Sophie was still cautious. Her heart wasn't fully open yet, but Damien's sincerity and his awkward effort at changing a tire had started to soften the wall she had built. Damien looked at her in her work uniform, strong and confident, yet warm. "I won't disappoint you again," he said quietly, with conviction. Sophie tilted her head, the corners of her mouth lifting ever so slightly. "We'll see. Actions speak louder than apologies." As Damien left the garage, he felt a strange sense of relief. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time in years, he was chasing something that felt meaningful. He glanced back at the sign above the shop, Langdon Auto, where dreams get rebuilt. And for once, he felt like he was rebuilding something too. Back inside, Sophie returned to her work. The fluorescent lights reflected off her face as she wiped sweat from her brow. "He's trying," she muttered. "But he better not think I'm that easy." Still, when she picked up the wrench, a small smile tugged at her lips. Jake, watching nearby, raised an eyebrow. "What's with the smile, Sophie?" She shook her head. "Nothing. Just first time I've seen a CEO lose a wrestling match with a lug nut." Inside, though, she knew she was giving Damien a small chance. And both of them, amid the noise of the garage, were taking the first quiet steps toward closing the distance between them. The community project would be the next test, a place where Damien's actions, not his wealth or name, would determine whether he could truly earn back her trust and maybe, just maybe, her heart. The soft glow of sunset filtered through the windows of Sophie Langdon's auto shop in Brooklyn, casting a warm amber light over the garage. The gentle clinking of metal blended with the laughter of volunteers, and the familiar scent of motor oil felt like part of the hopeful atmosphere. A banner outside read, "Free Repairs, Langdon Auto and Cross Capital Community Support," inviting beat-up cars from nearby neighborhoods to roll in. Sophie, in oil-stained jeans and a rolled-up white shirt, stood at the center of the shop, eyes bright as she guided a group of eager volunteers. Damien Cross, wearing a navy blue button-down and slacks, looked slightly out of place among the mechanical chaos, but the sincerity and determination in his eyes were undeniable. After his public apology and the scholarship fund named after her, Sophie had begun to lower her guard just enough to let him join the free repair project for low-income families. She handed him a wrench, a teasing glint in her eye. "Today you're trying the oil filter, but try not to drop it like you did with the tire last time, Damien." He accepted the wrench with a playful smirk. "I built a financial empire, Sophie. How hard can an oil filter be?" Her laughter rang through the garage, light and clear, softening the edges of the rough space. "Your empire won't help you here. Let me teach you how to listen to an engine." Standing beside him, she gave instructions with a calm, steady voice. Her hands moved over the tools like a graceful rhythm, and though Damien was clumsy, he listened closely. When oil splashed onto his shirt sleeve, Sophie couldn't help but laugh again. "Congratulations! You've just turned yourself into a live-action Jackson Pollock." Despite their constant bickering, there was an undeniable warmth between them. They eventually moved to the nearby community center, where volunteers were helping neighborhood residents with car repairs. A single mother named Maria took Sophie's hand, her eyes glassy with emotion as she received her newly repaired old truck. "You have no idea how much this means to me," she said, her voice shaking. Sophie wiped sweat from her brow and smiled. "Use it well, Maria. This is exactly why we're here." Standing off to the side, Damien watched silently, something stirring deep within him. Sophie wasn't just fixing cars, she was restoring dignity, bringing light into lives that had been ignored, and it made him want to belong in that world, her world. Later, back at the garage, with golden light spilling across the concrete floor, Damien shared something he hadn't told anyone in years. "When I was younger, I dreamed of building a place for orphan kids, a home where they'd feel safe. It's what my dad gave me, and I wanted to pass that on," he said, absently holding a car part, his voice distant. "But then Cross Capital happened. Somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was." Sophie looked at him, her eyes softer than ever. "You didn't forget, Damien. That dream's still there. You just have to be brave enough to go after it again." She gently placed a hand over his. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, they both felt an invisible thread pulling them closer together. They returned to work, and when a rusty old car came in with brake issues, Sophie showed Damien how to replace the pads. "Be gentle like you're speaking to the car," she said, standing close, her breath brushing against his cheek. Focused and uncharacteristically quiet, Damien followed her steps carefully, sweat beading on his forehead. When he tightened the final bolt and the brakes functioned perfectly, Sophie double-checked, then turned to him with a proud grin that lit up the entire shop. "Damien Cross, you just pulled off the impossible. I'm starting to think you could be a real mechanic." He laughed freely, loudly, his heart racing, not from the task, but from the way she looked at him. Of course, not everything went smoothly. When Damien suggested funding new equipment for the project, Sophie immediately pushed back, her voice firm. We don't need your money, Damien. This is about people, not invoices. Damien frowned. I'm just trying to help, Sophie. You can't do it all alone. She crossed her arms, her tone sharp but not cruel. I'm not alone. I have a team, a community. You need to learn how to be part of something, not stand above it. The tension between them hung heavy, but Damien took a breath and nodded. Then teach me, Sophie. I want to understand. Her expression softened. All right then, but don't expect me to go easy on you. The chemistry between them only grew like a slow-burning dance filled with emotion. Accidental touches when passing tools, lingering glances between bursts of laughter, and the way they slowly let down their guards made the garage feel warmer. Maria, watching from the side, caught on and smirked. You and that handsome guy keep looking at each other like you're in a rom-com. Sophie flushed a rare sight and quickly deflected. Don't get any ideas, Maria. He's just a clumsy apprentice. But when she looked at Damien fiddling with a wrench and clearly lost her heart, thumped a little harder, as if admitting something she wasn't ready to say out loud. As the day ended, the setting sun cast a fiery orange over the garage. Damien and Sophie stood side by side, admiring the line of repaired cars ready to be returned to their owners. You're changing lives here, Sophie, Damien said, voice low and sincere, eyes locked on her. And you're changing me. She glanced at him, heart fluttering, but still managed her signature smirk. Keep working, Damien. Actions speak louder than words. He smiled, warm and steady. Then I'll keep working. For you. They left the shop that evening, carrying something new, something unspoken but real. A bridge, invisible but strong, had begun to form between them. Sophie, still cautious, was starting to see that Damien might be someone who could share in her dream. Damien, driving back toward Manhattan, smiled at the thought of Sophie's proud smile the moment she saw him succeed, even in something small. Back in Brooklyn, Sophie wiped sweat from her brow and muttered under her breath, He's not bad, but don't think I'm letting him off the hook. Yet the smile on her lips, warm and undeniable, said everything. They were moving closer, step by step, through moments of laughter, sparks of conflict, and the slow building of trust. Something real was beginning to grow, something neither of them was quite ready to name, but both could feel. Under the soft lavender hues of the Valentine's Day sunset, Sophie Langdon's auto shop in Brooklyn felt transformed. What was usually a space filled with the clang of metal and the scent of oil now shimmered with warmth and intimacy. Flickering candles, carefully placed by volunteers on tool shelves, cast golden reflections on half-repaired cars. From an old speaker, Frank Sinatra's "The Way You Look Tonight" floated through the air, wrapping the garage in the sweet nostalgia of love. Sophie, in her usual oil-splattered jeans and rolled-up white shirt, stood in the middle of it all, beaming as she watched the volunteers decorate for their Valentine's community repair night. Her blonde hair was tied in a high ponytail, loose strands framing her face, and her eyes sparkled as old cars came back to life. Damien Cross, wearing his deep blue shirt and tailored slacks, no longer looked like a man lost in a world of gears and grease. He moved confidently now, wrench in hand, eyes never straying far from Sophie, the woman who had led him from arrogance to authenticity. Together they had built the free repair project from the ground up, and tonight the shop buzzed with Brooklyn residents bringing in everything from rusted sedans to worn-down trucks. At one lift, Sophie was coaching Damien on brake inspections. Her voice was gentle, but her signature playful tone lingered. Easy there, Damien. If you over-tighten it, we'll spend the whole night fixing your mistake. He smiled, gaze locked on her, as if she were the only thing in the world, Sinatra's voice fading into the background. You've taught me long enough, Sophie. Trust me, I won't mess this up. She raised an eyebrow, a knowing smile playing at her lips. Confident, are we? Let's see what you got, hotshot. With a focus honed over weeks of working side by side, Damien finished the task. Sophie double-checked the brake system and nodded, pride glowing in her eyes. Well, Damien Cross, you're making me think I could keep you around here full-time. Laughter and music filled the air, and then quietly, Damien took Sophie's hand and led her to a quiet corner of the shop. Candlelight danced across her face, highlighting her bright eyes and the smile that never failed to stir something deep in him. He took a deep breath. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled a small box from his pocket, his voice low and tender. "Sophie, you haven't just taught me how to fix cars, you've taught me how to fix myself. You made me want to live honestly, to dream again, to love with everything I have." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, the diamond cut in the shape of a gear, gleaming like a promise forged from all their battles and beginnings. "Will you be my partner, not just here in this garage, but for the rest of my life?" Sophie stared at the ring, then looked into his eyes. Her heart pounded. Tears welled, but her trademark humor never faded. "Only if you promise never to yell at me again for touching your car, Damian Cross." He burst out laughing, pulling her into his arms. And there, among wrenches and oil stains, they shared a kiss, tender but intense, as if every argument, every connection, every repaired part of their lives had led to this. When they finally broke apart, Sophie whispered, voice thick with emotion but full of light, "You're better at managing empires than fixing engines, you know. But I love how hard you try for me." Damian gently stroked her cheek, eyes full of warmth. "And I love how you make me want to be better, Sophie." Later that evening, they drove out in the Ferrari SF90 Stradale, now converted into a community rescue vehicle with Langdon Auto and Cross Capital logos proudly stamped on the doors. Their destination, a narrow street in the Bronx, where an elderly woman named Rosa had called about her car breaking down. Under the moonlight, Sophie and Damian worked in perfect sync. When the engine roared back to life, Rosa grasped both their hands, her voice trembling. "Thank you, my dears. Now I can go visit my grandson." Sophie squeezed her hand gently. "Don't worry, Mrs. Rosa. We'll always be here when you need us." Damian stood beside them, his heart full. In that moment, he knew this was home. Not a mansion, not an office. This. On the drive back, inside the Ferrari, Sophie looked at him with a hopeful glint. "I want to build a career center for orphans," she said. "Not just teach them mechanical skills, but give them real chances like my dad gave me." Damian placed his hand over hers on the gear shift, his voice firm. "And like my father gave me, I want to build it with you, Sophie. A place where dreams begin." She smiled, eyes soft. "You're getting awfully sentimental, Damian." He grinned and squeezed her hand. "Only for you." They pulled up to the garage, the moonlight bathing the building in a gentle glow. Damian took her hand, his eyes full of something deeper than love, something lasting. "You changed me, Sophie. From someone obsessed with control, you taught me how to love, how to trust, how to live for something bigger than myself." Sophie tilted her head, her eyes shimmering. "And you made me believe that sometimes collisions lead to something beautiful. But don't think I'll let you run the show." He laughed, pulling her close, and kissed her again under the stars, and the fading strains of Sinatra still playing inside the shop. When they stepped back inside, the volunteers erupted in applause and playful teasing at the sparkling ring on Sophie's finger. Jake, one of her longtime friends, called out, "Sophie, since when do you let a CEO steal your heart?" Sophie blushed, rare for her, but quipped back, "He had to work for it, Jake. Like, really work." Damian stood at her side, eyes never leaving her, and felt a kind of joy he'd never known before. He had once believed that power meant control, but with Sophie, he'd found the truth. Love, respect, shared dreams, that was power. And Sophie, looking back at Damian, knew she had changed too. She had dared to open her heart again, to believe in something uncertain but real. Together, hand in hand, they looked out at the repaired cars and toward the future. "The center will happen, Damian," Sophie said confidently. He squeezed her hand. "Together, Sophie. Always." Under the moonlight, the auto shop wasn't just a place to fix engines. It had become the place where two hearts had collided, fought, grown, and finally found their rhythm in love. From pride to vulnerability, from loneliness to partnership, and from two separate dreams to one shared future.